So still, for something like that, if it would fail once, it would be okay. If it would fail second time in the gate, means that something could be wrong, and it should go back maybe to check and be verified again.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I think your suggestion is maybe a good compromise for that goal, and I think we can express that in Zool config, because when the
you can
gate
do that
fails,
per job. So you can actually say, if this job fails, it can retry up to a certain amount. For all of our Tempest jobs, we set that to no retries. But it could be overridden in the gate one that just allows it to retry exactly once if it fails. But that's the entire job on the same code.
We could do it at the pipeline level. Because when you fail in the gate, we -2 instead of -1. We could make the rule basically, you can go straight into the gate if you don't have a -2. If you do have a -2, then you have to clean check, like basically to remove the -2. I think that would work.
Well, why? I'm not sure why that works. You get a -2 if you fail in the gate. That right?
You would keep the +1 from Zool saying it passed Garrett, but if it actually fails, then we put a -2. Or I think that's where Clark was going, because then if you just do the recheck, it would re-trigger it into the gate at the same time as putting it into check.
It's basically to implement Slavek's suggestion of like a yellow card. The -2 is your yellow card, and now you have to go through the extra process again. But if you haven't failed at least once in the gate, you won't have that yellow card -2 state, and you could go directly to the gate if you were approved.
-2 would be the red card, actually. So,
right.
So yellow card is you can still recheck only gate. Second time red card, you need to go to the check and do additional things, right? So that was the idea, basically.
We might be discussing two things right now. One is, could you have a patch that goes directly to gates bypassing check? I don't think that's what we were originally discussing. Right.
No, that is
yeah, that's what I thought. So I think
my understanding was that this whole discussion is about that. Yeah.
Oh, then I'm definitely against that, because we have
Clark,
too much testing.
So I think what Clark is saying is that you need a +1 to go to gate at all. Then if you fail in the gate and you have a +1, you get a -1. And if you fail in the gate with a -1, you get a -2. Is that right?
Sort of. So the clean check implementation, basically the idea, if we got rid of it entirely, you could go straight into the gate as soon as you were approved, regardless of whether or not you have a +1, -1 in verified. Right. But to get to the compromise state that Slavek is suggesting is, I think there are ways that you could construct new rules such that some states would be allowed to go directly to the gate. Other states would not be allowed to go to the gate.
What might help is if you just put up the actual YAML config for this, because the reason that works is in gate specifically, one of the requirements in for the trigger is that we have a comment from Zool that says +1. That's one of the things that is required before any of the gate jobs can trigger. So that could be altered in some way, so that it can be +1 or it can be +0, but not -1, in which case, you can have this be a more complicated way or the second path in. But actually having the current definition up for people to look at might help. Yeah.
Well, the definition isn't going to make a whole lot of sense to me because I'm not very adept at reading them. But I think that so Clark, I guess what I was hoping you were describing was, and I didn't quite fully flesh out what I was saying, but if you don't have any vote from Zool, then the most you're going to get is a check run. If you get a +1, that means you got a check run successfully. That means you're a candidate for the gate. So you run in the gate, and if you get a fail and you have a +1, then you get a -1. You could do a recheck, which would go in the check again. But if you do a re-verify will only work if you have a -1. I guess that's a problem, because you could have a -1 from check, right?
Yeah. And there may be ways to look at this. I think what I'm taking away from this is that people are generally not comfortable with just opening up direct access to the gate, regardless of other CI state, if you have an approval.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's a good
and
plan.
so any sort of implementation that would happen here is likely going to have to be a compromise between the current state and the go back to just like, I don't want to call it a default state because there isn't really one, but basically the idea that you could just jump straight in as soon as a reviewer said approved.
I guess I would summarize my position, which is probably Sean's position as well, which is like, I'm interested in a very limited set of tools that are limited to a certain number of people that can optimize a little bit, meaning go into the gate one more time, but not over and over and over again. Definitely not bypass check. Definitely not anything like that. But like just a small optimization to say it failed on apt, so like let's try this again, to try to circumvent going through check again, but not unlimited.
Yeah, so maybe we should capture that, and then we can figure out, because I don't want to like debug Zool config in this session, right? I think what we should capture is kind of like, what kind of compromise do we think is acceptable, and then we can go figure out how do we express that in Zool's configuration, or do we need to make a new Zool feature or whatever to try and accomplish that? That's probably the outcome here.
Yeah. I mean, sorry. My main concern is that in general, when you want to recheck, that's because of a specific job. So basically, if I could be saying, okay, I know that this job is having some problems, so I need just to check it again, that's fine. If, for example, I want to go to the gate, then it will be a problem for me because maybe this will also fail in the gate, right? So, I mean, if I want to recheck, because, like, for example, I don't know, some unit tests failed, and I know that is because is this or that. But
if we know there's an info issue preventing a specific job from working, we merge a patch to make it non-voting until we fix the thing. If we're okay with actually merging the thing, we shouldn't just be retriggering that one job because we know it's flaky or that it's whatever, right?
Yeah, I also don't think that that's really the, that would kind of like imply that we recheck the job that failed in gate, implying that the same set of jobs are in both, which is conventionally true, but not necessarily
Even if
true.
it's the same set of jobs, it's not necessarily the same content. So
Yeah.
the way that Zool works is there's a build set of a particular checkout of all the repos that's common to all the jobs for that one execution.
Right.
Unless we're going to replicate the exact same set of checkouts, which will no longer be necessarily consistent with master, it invalidates all the results of the other jobs because it could have been fine before the previous patch merged and now might fail. So that's why we have rerun all the jobs on a specific one.
Awesome. Let's hold for the folks that were had their hands up. Artem.
Yeah, thanks. I was just willing to explain why initially I was raising the topic. I know that Steven is doing this quite often, and me also, when we are doing some introducing some modernization into certain projects, we are usually opening a series of changes, basically stacked changes. And typically they are being reviewed and gated more or less in one shot. And what is happening often, that imagine you have a series of 10 changes and change number 1 fail in gate with some networking issue. Basically, it means that all of your changes after that change are also immediately aborted. And the only way for you to actually restart is go again back to change number 2 and do recheck there. And for the projects where recheck is taking like 3-4 hours, it's just insane.
That's not how that was meant to work. There was a regression in Zool at one point that caused that to abort all the subsequent ones. But if it's meant to test each patch on its own,
I mean, really stacked changes.
Yeah,
not independent changes.
If they're in
a series, it shouldn't abort all the previous ones and mark them as false.
But it would, because how it can
correct. Sean, what you're talking about is when there's independent changes. So if 3 different reviewers approve 3 different changes, that are unrelated other than the fact that they were approved at the same time?
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the way Zool used to work is you had tree patches in the same branch, and if the bottom one failed, the other ones would still run to completion, and we would get results saying if it was true or
But-
not. And that told us if the test that failed on the previous one was also flaky. At
But-
some point, that changed.
But only if they're not in a series together. And the reason for that is Garrett will not let you merge a change if its parent cannot merge.
Oh yeah, it will not leave you merge it, but it didn't use to -2 it. At some point, it started aborting it and removing the
I mean,
+1 and stuff from Zool. And
It's been that way for like 10 years at least. Like it's
no, it's been that way for maybe 1 to 2 years at most, because it definitely wasn't doing this before the pandemic.
What you're describing was the case for things that are independent and like just approved by coincidence in the time span that is, related, but not related through Git itself. And then there was that bug in it that caused the only coincidentally related changes to be treated like Git related changes. But my understanding is the directly Git related changes have always been treated this way.
I would say it actually doesn't really matter that much. The problem is really the amount of time I would need to invest in case of change. Not really a flaky test. It may be also a flaky test somewhere in DevStack in unrelated project, what happens from me time to time. But it's also quite often I see simply network failures due to networking reasons. And in that case, I need to basically process afterwards all the complete series of changes one by one. And it takes me ages.
I wonder if for that specific case, if we can disable nudging all of the patches so in the series into gate at the same time, but the nudge the one only when the previous one is merged. I've seen the same behavior in Puppet not quite, barely quite, but yeah, sometimes. But yeah, I share the same kind of feeling. But yeah, there will be a kind of a trade-off. But yeah, if we want to avoid that all or nothing behavior, then the one option will be to do things in gate one by one.
So the all or nothing behavior depends on whether it's check or gate, because one is using the dependent pipeline and one's not. So in check, if the base patch fails in check, it doesn't cause all of the subsequent ones to fail. In gate,
yeah, for check you're correct, but for gate, if the parent one fails, then the subsequent one all fails and get +2. That's the current behavior I'm aware of, and some other people are aware of, I think.
All right. Well, we're thinking about that, Kancham.
Yeah, so going back to the discussion when I raised hand. So the one is CV bug fixes and urgent bug fixes were mentioned, right? So we do have a way to merge them with the force merge, right? The infra admin have a
we can. On the CV point though, I was very happy that we didn't do that, because we caused 2 or 3 regressions with the CV patches the last time we had them for Nova in check that wouldn't have been cast in gate. So like that's an example of where we should not bypass check until we have at least one check run of all of the jobs.
Sean, can you please leave Jeman reply, and then after that you will reply to him. Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's okay. That's why my point was for CV, we are saying like bypassing the check and doing this re-verify will help is not a valid point, because you can always force merge it, right? And that doesn't help, as Sean mentioned. We have to test it thoroughly, the CV thing and all. If there is any urgent change, like in Tempest we faced during the constraint pin and all, we can merge it with force merge, right? So there are the way to handle these kind of thing. And second is
I want to clarify, there are multiple layers of outlet here. Like we can directly unqueue things straight to the gate if they've been approved. We can manually approve things. Like I'm talking as like an admin of the software for Garrett and Zool. We can directly unqueue to the gate if other code reviewers have approved them. We can approve them ourselves and then directly unqueue them to the gate. Or as you say, we can force merge, right? So it's not just force merge isn't the only outlet here. There are kind of different layers of risk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, thanks. And another point is like with one recheck allowed or something, this we discussed about yellow card. I'm not sure how much that will help, because what I have observed is whenever we face this situation, the gate failure happens multiple times. If they're able to just merge with one recheck, we are happy. But giving just a one yellow card won't help here, because whenever anything stuck in gate, it's stuck for 5-6 times of running and some days, right? So that won't solve. Like just a one re-verify we can allow, and it will help us to solve all the problem.
I think that the yellow card, red card thing will help. I think what you're saying is it will not help very much, and I think that is true. I think that there are certain situations where if you could just have one more go through, it was like everything worked except, a post upload thing, and if you could go straight back to the gate, it's going to save you 2 hours, which I think is true. It's definitely not a massive optimization. It's just something. It probably is more meaningful to the person who's been rechecking all day than it really is to like the actual timeline, and that's true.
Yeah.
I'm much more concerned about this being abused than the actual like speed up that would provide, I guess. So I err on the side of not opening this up further. It's just that if you do the one yellow card, red card thing, like I feel like it will help the humans feel like, they got their one get out of jail free card a little bit.
Yeah.
But
yeah, overall, like what re-verify I'm not in in favor of is because with all these scenario we discussed, it will allow more bugs to be introduced, and then we'll have more gate instability. So for some time it might see like we are okay able to merge the things quickly, but for some cycle or something, then we'll be say, okay, instead of 3-4 known bug which is causing our gate instability, now we have the 7-8 bugs. So I'm in favor of like doing what we are doing currently, going through the check pipeline and make sure like we are not introducing any regression or any new bug. The another thing, if you want to make gate stability, is just fix the bug which is causing right, this we have been saying for years.
Fix the network, yeah.
reducing the pain.
Yeah.
Reducing the pain will mean that fewer bugs get fixed for sure.
Yeah.
All right. I raised my own hand, but just wanted to add. So in the GitHub world and with OpenShift or Kubernetes, they use a different CI system called Pro, and that seems to have an ability to run specific test jobs.
Does
yeah?
It's an anti-pattern to retrigger a single
I
one.
know.
And unfortunately, people have been doing that, but yeah, we've actually had regressions where someone has done that and it's actually broken the build. So from developing the new installer, we've had direct experience of people force merging a thing that then broke multiple other teams.
And it goes back to what Sean was mentioning before, where Zool creates this build set, which is more than just a job, right? It's all of this state about the way the world looks right now. Maybe that right now is actually a future state, but the point is that it's the Nova state, it's the Cinder state, it's the Neutron state, it's whatever else state that you've decided to encode in this job. That's that shared state across all of the jobs. And so if you start saying, well, we're only going to rerun this one job and lock that in, what you can easily do is have jobs that each work only at a given state, lock that in, and then you merge the code and then everything's broken, right? Like right. Zool's view of the world is not compatible with this idea. And it comes up every time we talk about this, and it's just not compatible with the way Zool works.
It's not just that. It's not compatible with merging things that work in general, right? I mean, it's like kind of the GitHub model where you're like, well, this passed check before the merge, so we must be fine to just merge them, right? I mean,
Go for it,
Yeah,
Stephen.
just no. I mean, I just want to double check something. Maybe I'm wrong, so that's why I'm asking this question. Maybe this is silly, but there is a big difference in between the check pipeline and the get pipeline, right? With the get pipeline, I totally understand and I totally agree with that, with the fact that we basically need to test the world. We basically need to test that basically nothing will, we basically need to test the wall, like the wall environment, indeed, by the job. Sure. For rechecks, we don't do that, right? For rechecks, we
We
only
do.
recheck that. We do?
No. What we do is the build set, as Clark was trying to mention, it contains the shards of every required project required in every job, and they're consistent across all of the jobs, so that we know that when we're using the Ceph Tempest job and the non-Ceph Tempest job, they're running the exact same commits of everything, so we get a good view of that. So when we do a
With
recheck,
recheck?
Well,
with
hang on.
recheck, we go back into the pipeline as if it's the first time, and we get a new consistent state with the current set of master, because in the 3 hours it's been since that job reported, many things could have merged. So we go with a new speculative execution, and again, it's consistent for everything in that build set.
I think Sylvan is making the distinction, which is there, that we would not want to re-verify one job from gate, because you would end up passing with tests that you checked against a different thing in front. That doesn't seem to be the case in check, but it is, because
Okay.
you will run with a different neutron than you did. You passed this
I
job
see.
with one neutron, and you passed this job with the other.
I see. I see. So if we are not doing that with, once it's failed with the get, that's probably due to, for example, for Nova, due to some neutron order change. So when rechecking, we also need to test with that. I don't know. I understand. Okay, thanks. Cool.
The example we had in GitHub was we have a common library called libcommon because we're unimaginative, and we had a job pass with one version of that, but since then a new version of that was bumped, and then when we retriggered, it passed with that, and that broke our API compatibility. We actually couldn't compile anymore because of how that was done. It just happened that the job that we're triggering didn't need to do that. So like we have a direct experience that retriggering single jobs is potentially dangerous. Before that, we had the worst experience where it actually was running the jobs on the code that you submitted, not the code you submitted against master, but the actual commit that you had. Again, that can give you incorrect assertions because it's not actually going to be testing it properly with the full integrated set.
I mean, that being said, I mean, say the gate is failing. It goes back to the gate is failing. Then we need to recheck, and then we need to check again the gate. Okay, basically for the moment, if I'm not wrong, when the gate fails, we recheck. Then that means that basically we check again the check pipeline and then the gate pipeline. Okay. But if, for example, it failed in the gate again due to some neutron problem for Nova, or maybe I should be saying the other way because that's not sometimes due to Nova. So basically, the neutron change failed due to a Nova order change. When rechecking neutron, the neutron change, if we don't verify Nova, if basically wouldn't be seeing the problem, but then when calling again the gate pipeline, we'll see it again, right? So why do we need to again recheck all the stuff
You're
in the
mixing
check?
two things. What you're trying to describe there, I think, is when we have a depends on, and that's again a different thing. That just influences which repos and commits we're checking out there.
I don't think that's what he's. I don't think that's what he's describing. I think what he's saying is, if you fail in gate because a Nova patch is in front of you, and then you go and recheck, you're not going to have that Nova patch in front of you because that Nova patch didn't merge. But you could go back into the gate and get unlucky with that patch in front of you again, which is absolutely true.
Yeah, but that's not how that actually works. So if you engage where you've got the integrated pipeline and there's a separate patch that hasn't merged yet in front of you, if that fails,
Right.
it restarts your job and you continue without that. So you don't get kicked out of gate
unless it's the same job, unless you fail the same job, right? Or it's
Unless it's
only if
the-
you fail the same.
No, you only get
Yeah.
kicked out if a job in your build set fails.
Yeah.
Which are the ones running
I
on your
see.
change. So
I
just
see.
because a glance change was in front of you and it was originally speculatively merging that in to test for it doesn't mean they'll kick you out.
I
Yeah,
thought
so-
that it would if you fail the same job
No,
or the opposite
No.
job or something.
no, because it can't know if you failed due to a thing ahead of you in the queue, and so that the way to check is to remove the thing ahead of you in the queue with a new, and that creates a new
Yeah.
state, and then rerun the jobs with that new state.
Sure,
And then,
I thought there was an optimization where it would be it assumed that if you failed a different job than the one that guy failed, then you must have failed for some unrelated reason
No.
to why
No,
he
the
failed.
only time that happens is if, and this is go back to what Clark said before, if you have two changes in Nova and the bottom one in Nova changes, it kicks out both.
Of
But
course,
if it's one change in Nova, one in Neutron, then it's fine.
All right.
Clark, what was the flag we did in Tempest for knowing this failure in advance at DQ from the
so
Zool?
that behavior is all it does is it changes when Zool takes action on the failure.
Okay.
So by default, Zool has to wait for the job to complete and report success or failure. If it, then it says, oh, it failed, I need to reconfigure the state and make a new state for the things that are behind. What we did was you can implement rules that detect failures while the job is still running. And it allows Zool to basically speed things up by resetting that new state ahead of time, ahead of when it normally would have in the past. And so that should only be an optimization in terms of time and not change the end result.
So remember how
Yeah.
that works as well is the job that we're monitoring with those rules, it still runs to completion. It's just that the other stuff get requeued earlier rather than waiting for it to complete. So you still get all the same results back, and it's effectively transparent from the point of view of the job that's failing that this is happening.
Correct.
So in Gate, can we have such flag like fail early or something when there's a single
I
job
think we
failure?
already
at
do.
this- We do?
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, after the last PTG, we had a conversation afterwards where I reported that there was a broken behavior. And it turned out there was a bug in how Zool was doing that pre-check thing where if it failed in a post job and that got requeued or a pre-job, whatever happened to be, it incorrectly failed the build set. So what would happen is occasionally we would... so in the talk jobs, if we fail to download a package and we haven't got to the point of actually doing it the running part yet, we will actually try that a couple of times. So what we actually were seeing is the thing that we tried, it was incorrectly detecting that it failed once and then abandoning the entire build set, but that has now been fixed as of about 2 or 3 months ago.
But if we do in a Gate, like our main motive in Gate is something is failing, we wanted to abandon the next test, because in check we have already checked all the testing and things, and if Gate something is failing, even the talk job, and that is stopping and
You don't want
making us to
to
recheck.
You don't want to stop any of the jobs in the current build set, but you want to requeue
I'm
any build sets for
I'm
other
saying
changes. Yeah.
in a Gate, at least if it's a second run or whatever, in a Gate, just stop the build set itself, because if a single job is failing more than we are interested in other job results, we have to do recheck anyways, right?
But the problem with that is then you lose debugging information potentially to fix whatever issue that was. So yeah, you're still going to recheck it, but if it passes in the recheck, then you've lost the context for being able to debug properly.
Well, it depends on what the failure was. I mean,
Yeah,
you're
I guess
right.
yeah.
If you
And there are
if you
less
come up and you
chances.
see an apt failure, you are pretty careful. You should be able to recheck that fairly confidently. But
So we can express that in a different way in Zool already. You can express dependent jobs. And you do this whenever you're having the output of one job consumed by another. But in Gate, if we wanted to have the dependencies of like, don't run the other jobs because the Tox one failed, we can actually express that already just by making them dependent,
that
but
is
only in there.
that's for check pipeline also will be valid, right?
It's valid, but I'm just saying if we want to have that special optimization just for gate because we know we're going to have to go through everything again, we could actually do it in gate. We shouldn't do it in check because we want to get
Yeah.
as much feedback as early as we can. But in gate, if we want to have a slightly different policy on that, we can express those dependencies only in the gate variant of it. And you can do that when you're defining the project section.
So
So I was just say, I think we're getting time checked on this. What I wanted to say though, like before we end, is I think a good outcome of this is kind of there's recognition that we don't want to just open the floodgates to the gate queue. I don't hear anyone saying like that would be a good thing, right? So I think it would be good if we could describe behaviors that are different than today that OpenStack thinks would generally be beneficial. And then we can see, how many of those are implementable today, how many of them make sense for Zool feature, how many of them do we need to like deep dive into more to understand? Like, but basically, let's figure out like the goals of our gating system, or no, that's not right. We know what the goals are, but if we can figure out the behaviors that we would like to change, then we can kind of maybe come up with some tweaks to the configs that can implement some of that.
So before we go to Sean, I think that you said earlier my summary of or trying to codify what my summary at the time was maybe a good idea, and I just wanted to maybe edit my summary since we were about to codify that and say that I think that after listening to this conversation, I want to go back to this conversation and you going over all of the other pressure relief valves, is that as someone who was trying to help push through like the 400 or whatever ridiculous patches that we had for this last CVE all under pressure, I feel like maybe we should just like stick with what we got, rely on the direct queue, force merge if we absolutely have to, and not mess with the system, I guess is my point. Like all of these complex red card, yellow card, re-verify, but only these people. Like I think I've changed my opinion since the beginning of this that maybe we should not mess with it.
Thanks. Sean, can you close this out?
Yeah, I guess so. The one thing I was just going to say as well is there are other tenants in Azure that we have for Ansible and other people as well. I'm not sure if they are following the same kind of green check, gate, etc. So if we are looking at changing this, I kind of agree with that. I'm not sure we should, but if we are looking at that, but maybe we should be looking at what other people are doing with this to get feedback from them on what they think is a good workflow. But
I think.
Yeah.
So to directly address that, no, OpenStack is the only Zool tenant that has clean check implemented, and I think that's one of the reasons why this has come up. Is the Zool developers are like, we don't use it, and we think it's silly that you do. But at the same time, OpenStack has a lot more moving parts and a lot more people, and sometimes having safety barriers is more necessary when when you exceed the number of people that can stay in communication with each other and keep on top of everything all at once, then safety barriers become more important, I guess. So yes, people are doing things differently, but that doesn't necessarily make what OpenStack is doing is wrong, I guess. It's just trying to figure out how to make things work more happily if possible.
Well, like the way to do that in OpenStack per project basis right now is we add in a quick check, and then if Neutron wants to use quick check instead of check, then the Zool that's there, it votes with +2, and then it just gets merged with the promote jobs, etc. So like if they wanted to opt into that, they could. I would hope that in general, very few would ever do that, but like that's a way of doing it today. The projects that want to have the full double gating could, but I think that will end up meaning that the ones that have the double gating will find the bugs of the people who don't.
All right, let's wrap this up, and thank you all for participating. Before we move on to the next one, I'd like to pause recording and take a team picture. We've had a bigger audience, but we've lost it over the week, but let's try to do this with what we have. Let's disable recording.